Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the AGI's session as part of the KTN Space and Geospatial Pavilion. I hope you've had a chance to get along to a number of the other sessions that have been on in the last 2 weeks. Hope you've been following everything that's been happening around COP26 as well. Big thank you to KTN and I guess to all of the partners that have come together to make this 2 weeks of sharing space and geospatial information for COP26 such a success, and the ability for us to share so much information about how much geospatial has got to offer as far as working towards climate change. A little bit of housekeeping to start with. The session is being recorded, so please do be aware of that if you're putting notes in the chat. Please do use that chat. Let us know where you're calling in from. Let us introduce yourself. Do send us questions as you listen to the speakers and panelists across the course of today. We will do our absolute best to pull your questions into the discussions that we will have. I do need to mention as well, today is the 11th of November, and in the UK we do observe Remembrance Day. So at 11 AM we will be pausing the session for a 2-minute silence as part of that. So with that, you are here today to listen to climate change in our urban environments. You will have myself, Denise McKenzie, so I'm the chair of the Council for the AGI here in the United Kingdom. I am also a consultant, one of the co-authors of Locust Charter, and sit on a variety of advisory boards across the geospatial community. My co-host for today is James Cutler, another fellow council member of the AGI and recently joined the Satellite Applications Catapult, and I will let him tell you a bit more about his role and what he's doing there when he joins us in the second session. So as part of AGI itself, I should say, is the membership organisation for the United Kingdom, and we encompass all of the geospatial community, be that the space sector, the surveying sector, those that are doing geospatial analytics, those that are building maps all around, all about our organisation. Anybody that is working with location data is somebody that we consider to be part of that UK geospatial community. And as a community, we're very much about actively supporting a sustainable future, both in the context that we're talking today about climate change and what needs to happen as far as working towards mitigating the issues around that, but also looking at that sustainable future for the industry and the profession and what these changes are bringing as far as business goes, as far as our ability to work in partnership between government and the private sector and the research community. So it's very much about looking at how we support all of that. So with that, I want to introduce our first session, and I'll be pulling up our first speaker in just a second. So we will have 2 sections for today. The first hour, we're going to be looking at climate change in our urban environments, very much from the opportunities and challenges side. So we'll be looking here with speakers that are covering areas of policy. They'll be looking at how geospatial is being used, particularly on the ground, some of them in local government areas, some of it in disaster response, some of it in the development space as well. And I think one of the great things about the presenters you're going to hear this morning is I guess the breadth and diversity of which geospatial is being used in the world and how it's actually supporting what we're doing in climate change and working towards that in our urban environment. So with that, I'll ask Lizzie Stutchbury to join me on screen as well. Lizzie is the lead consultant at Informed Solutions. I'm also proud to say she's an ex-member of AGI Council as well, and did a lot with working with us on council just a few years ago. So hopefully I will stop sharing, and hopefully we've got Lizzie on screen.
Thanks,
and Lizzie,
Denise.
if you want to put your slides up and take it away.
Brilliant. Okay. It says it's sharing, so if there's any issues, back it in the chat. But yeah, as Denise says, I am a lead consultant with Informed Solutions. We are an independent IT consultancy specialising in location analytics and AI. And yes, I've been in industry about 10 years now, and yeah, a couple of years since I've been on council, so I'm starting to feel a little old, but there we go. My main focus is data and service design, so working with clients like the Cabinet Office, Royal Mail, also people like Scotland's Royal Payments Inspection Division, and I head up our internal data and GIS community of praxis. Today, my focus then is going to be kind of on the planning process that we have here in the UK mostly, and how we can use things like information and changes in technology and advancements in things like that area to help both the planning process, but also land managers and developers as they go through that process themselves. So why now? Well, I'm sure you're all aware, it's in the bio for this session. The United Nations predicts about 70% of the world's population will be living in urban environments by 2050. But at the same time, the EU is currently aiming to be climate neutral by 2050. And that's quite a big thing to be balancing at the same time. So we need to understand the pressures and the challenges that this will place on cities and urban landscapes as they expand and they develop over that time period. Now, urban environments, I'm sure we're all aware, are quite complex environments, and the huge increases they're seeing in things like population are currently putting huge pressures on things like transport, food, health, but they're also putting quite a lot of pressure on the natural environment, either because we're expanding into it or we're using more resources to support our larger environments. And geographic information has a huge part to play in this, and part of the wider data landscape too. It's very critical to be able to both understand the issues that we're seeing, but also kind of identifying the solutions. Now, we're working with NatureScot. They're just an organization, a bit of an example of kind of different planning organizations. Now, they're specifically looking at how the natural environment can be protected in Scotland, and how that can be protected through the planning process. In particular, in terms of urban environments, because you might think NatureScot and think, is that not rural? They're actually heavily involved in the Central Scotland Green Network. If you're not aware of that, it's one of the largest and most ambitious green infrastructure programs in Europe. One key focus is climate change, which is obviously related to a lot of things that we're here for at the moment, but also looking at biodiversity loss and environmental inequality. In particular, looking to connect people up via green spaces, which are a really important component of our urban environments, and also looking at how they can promote high quality green infrastructure in placemaking and urban design, so very much highly up in that planning sphere. Now, NatureScot, like any other planning organisation, local authority planning, Scottish Forestry, if we're focusing on Scotland, are responsible for managing thousands of planning applications every year. So what kinds of challenges are we seeing in the planning environment? Well, first of all, there's a lot of issues in terms of there's lots of data out there, but developers or applicants in this kind of environment don't necessarily know how to access that data. They don't know what's available to them, and how they can use that to inform proposals that they're putting forward. That vast amount of data is also available to the organizations themselves, but a lot of the time it's siloed. The way that technology is built up over years, 20, 30 years, it's hard to access data. It's split across things like GIS systems, case management systems, document systems, and that can be quite hard to interrogate. And to make this worse, a lot of the data is in the form of unstructured data. So lots of text, data we can't do much with, you get lots of PDFs. They might be nice for the end user to work with, but they're not great for us to do anything useful with. To go with this and compound it, there's a common issue with a lot of planning organizations that there's a lack of knowledge retention and sharing within organizations, and how you manage to keep that information to allow consistency in your decision making. If you look at those as a whole, actually, it makes the planning process pretty difficult, whether we're talking about urban or the rural setting. It's complex and it's really hard for people to engage with. So what is out there? What innovations are there in technology and different data and things that are going on at the moment that enable people like NatureScot, which is what we're looking at with them, but also others, to make more sustainable, more efficient, and also more consistent planning applications, processes, decisions, etc. Well, one of the first problems I mentioned was obviously people not being able to know what is available to them to be able to access and make good applications or good proposals. Well, in turn, that means organizations are spending a lot of time filtering applications that are ineligible, basic information that doesn't even need to be received. If we can use the data to help underpin perhaps rules that we can make available to users, we can identify things like ineligible applications up front. We can tell organizations, by the way, you flagged up, I don't know, you're in perhaps involving a protected species in the area that you're looking at, you haven't put a mitigation in here. You might want to do that before you submit. Then you can improve the application process and the quality of proposals that are coming through, which is both beneficial to developers, but also beneficial to the organizations assessing them. So then you've also got things like artificial intelligence, particularly tools like machine learning, natural language, tell I've got a cold, natural language processing. They really enable us to engage with that kind of unstructured textual-based data that makes up a lot of the information in this space. Being able to automate the analysis of data, could be guidance from organizations, previous casework, really does unlock a lot of the value that's locked away in that type of data at the moment. It's also quite good because, you know, the way we process our brains as humans, perhaps the way we search for things isn't the way that we can train rules or particular other software to think about that. This means we can look at how we can provide the relevant information right to the fingertips of decision makers quickly, so efficient for them. They're not having to use certain searches, find certain things, which is also slightly subjective because we all think differently. It also allows us to think about how we can use common themes that we're seeing in data. You know, we can pick things like geographic characteristics, the type of development, and therefore look at how we can link up different data pieces. We can kind of cross those silos of data systems that we've got and allow us to see different things that are about information that might be relevant. So that can, one, help us to understand kind of precedents, see what happened in other situations that may be the same, and also kind of drive consistency in things that we're doing. It also allows us to have a look at how cumulative effects or perhaps temporal changes over time can have an impact. So perhaps a development or an activity is encroaching on a protected species. So let's imagine development A, the mitigations that they've put in place, fine, it goes ahead. But it's still in proximity to, say, that protected species. And then you may have development B that's looking at the same thing, but a completely different development, completely different set of characteristics. And you may never link the two, but cumulatively, what impact are they having on that species? So we can use the data to kind of surface things like that to us. Together, all these things help us kind of simplify the planning process. There's also more kind of general things that we can take benefits or advantages from in the environment. So whether we're looking at ways we can encode guidance, we can make that more available to users and the applicants. We can also make that easier for upskilling new users or new colleagues in organizations. There's things like the cloud and cloud native services that organizations can make use of. These allow them to, you know, make benefits of scaling up, but also scaling down in fluctuations that kind of go with their planning process throughout the year. That's very cost effective for them and much more flexible. Finally, and possibly most importantly, looking at open standards, whether that's integration of systems, perhaps open standards for data, allow organizations to interrogate between systems, share with others, but also unlock the value of data that they already have. You know, most organizations are not in a financial position to completely modernize their technology estates. So we need to find ways to allow them to integrate or use what they've got in existing value. I am almost on time, I think, Denise. I've just popped you spoke up. I was just going to say all of these things kind of improve efficiency and save money. So, you know, I've talked a little about NatureScot and we're working with them specifically at the moment. But if anyone is interested or has any further questions, please do let me know. I think I've timed that quite well.
I think you timed that perfectly. So everybody, I'm just going to share my screen. And thank you so much, Lizzie. We are all about to observe now a 2-minute silence, everybody. So please bow your heads and take a moment to pause and think. Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Lizzie, for an excellent presentation and for very much sticking to time there. That's greatly appreciated. The next speaker I'd like to introduce is if I could get Charles to put his camera on and get slides ready. So Charles has been Esri's UK CTO since 2008, bringing 25 years of experience in many, many different types of projects on different scales and different sectors. You know, I always love listening to Charles's insights. Somebody who's had the level of experience that he has always got a very interesting perspective, I think, on the world of geospatial and what it has to offer. And I know the topic he's doing today, I'm really keen to see this presentation, and he's going to talk to you a bit about digital twins, I believe, Charles, but perhaps not the usual presentation that you might get about digital twins. So with that, I'll hand over to Charles to talk you through his presentation.
Okay, and you will need to keep me to time, so give me a 2-minute warning or something. I'm just going to share my screen. Just let me know when you can see something. Is that coming through?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, so I don't have any slides. I'm just going to be talking and hopefully running a demo. And I want to, I think, make a case for stepping back and celebrating and acknowledging some of the basics of what we call GIS or spatial technologies or location intelligence or any other phrase we want to use for it. So if you're somebody from a GIS background, forgive me, I'm going to be talking about absolute basics. And if you're new to this, I'm sort of trying to make a case for a better understanding and use of fundamental location information. So this is Edinburgh. I live somewhere just off map here to the right. It's a city like many across the world. Cities are dense, complex places with lots of competing needs and requirements. And we need to, as we all know, we need to make better decisions about how we manage these cities, how we live in them, what infrastructure we put in place, and how we change over time and how we minimize our impact on each other, on the planet, and so on. And they're all complex decisions. Another problem we have is, Lizzie's just been talking about planning, for example. Many decisions are made in isolation. It's about my property and what I'm doing with it. If I'm a water utility, I'm interested in where I might be changing a pipe network or a mains and so on. These decisions are made in isolation often, and the aggregate impact of them are quite hard to understand. So if you're applying for permission to do something like, let's imagine you want to tarmac your garden so that you can park your extra car there. That decision in its own, sort of just for you, is not a huge impact. But if you think about everyone in Edinburgh wanting to tarmac the drive, the overall impact could be increased risk of flooding and a reduction of resilience. So let me just illustrate some of how I think we can tackle some of these things. I'm just going to zoom in a part of Edinburgh here. I'm going to change the background map to something simpler so we can see it a little bit easier. And just talk you through what I have on screen. So this is a very simple mocked up view of a electrical network. And in this little sort of discussion, I'm thinking about, I want to lay a new cable, underground cable, in order to service a few more properties and maybe cope with some local solar or wind manufacturers. So I want to put some infrastructure in place that hopefully will increase resilience of the electrical network and make us less reliant on fossil fuels. That's the decision I want to make. Now, in this area, I can see buildings, I can see green land, and I can see a few little sort of strange dots around here. But if I zoom right in, you can see that as I move the mouse, I am basically the point that I'm putting my attention into. I'm getting some information about it. So think about this position. I'm broadcasting just by very much moving my mouse around an area that I'm interested in. Now you can see these lines appearing. These lines are telling me the distance to things I might be interested in. So if I come over here, I can see there's a rowan tree here, there's an oak tree here, and there are tree preservations on these things. So those trees, there is a database managed by Edinburgh Council of tree preservation orders. You can think of it as a simple digital twin. It records species of tree, the size of the canopy of it, maybe its height, tree preservation order number, and some other pieces of information. And it's sat in a database somewhere of a big record of trees, like an Excel spreadsheet or something. Well, it's more sophisticated than that, but similar idea. And it sits in isolation saying, here are trees you need to be aware of. There are other things in this area, like there are constraints, there's listed buildings, there are areas of special scientific interest, there might be contaminated land. All of these types of information are stored in different siloed databases, as Lizzie was talking about. Now, I need to, when I plan this cable that I'm going to put down, I need to understand if I lay a cable and it goes over, for example, an abandoned gas main that I'm not aware of, that will cost a lot of money to do and could cause a lot of problems. If I put this cable through a SSSI, I probably need to do lots of quite an additional survey work and do mitigation to minimize my impact on that environment. Now, the way people tend to tie together lots of digital twins is they need to find ways to link them. And often that involves building common ontologies, common schemas, common sharing mechanisms. And then you can link together the different digital twins and you can ask questions of them. What is the impact of this line that I'm putting through as a cable upon all these different data sets? Now, what I think we can do with location is we can link together these different digital twins very simply. So just by moving my mouse, I'm linking together a twin of trees and how they behave in Edinburgh with an area of interest. Now, if I now go and I move down here, you can see I've just found there's a listed building here. Over here, I've got, let me just pan the map down a little bit. I've got a SSSI, contaminated land, this area, oh, that's an abandoned gas main. So what I'm doing here by moving this mouse is I'm using its position as an index to ask questions of different digital twins. I'm saying, I'm interested in here, tell me something about you. The only things I need to link the activity that I'm carrying out with these other data sets is a knowledge of where I am and what questions I can ask of those digital twins. So for example, I can say to these trees, if I lay a cable here, is that an issue? And it's coming back and saying, yes, if you're inside this area, we need to know about it. If I go into this area, the listed building can probably tell me you're going to be very constrained in what you do in this area. If I go and work in contaminated land, I'm going to do lots of remedial work to make sure that I'm not worsening the problem of contamination in that area. So let's go and create a cable. So first thing, I've just clicked to say I want to create something, and already the digital twin of my electrical network knows here's where I am, and these yellow parts, you can connect validly to these points. So it's telling me where I can connect. So just by clicking, I've run an analysis of a network and say, where can I add this type of cable to the existing network? And then I can start drawing. Now, I'm not going to do a proper design. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to draw this line. And what you can see on the right-hand side is I've got a design report telling me the material cost of the cable itself. And as I increase the length of the cable, the cost goes up. The construction cost of digging trenches in the road. When I click on this line, I'm actually asking a question of Edinburgh City Council's reinstatement category for roads, which tells me how much the quality of road I need to sort of dig a trench in, and then what state I need to put it back into. And that's coming into the construction cost. If I go and put the cable through the listed building site, you can see it's telling me you've got a constraint here. I found a listed building. If I move up here, it's adding constraints. It said it's found some tree preservation orders. So 2 tree preservation orders found. It tells me the species of these trees. If I move down here into some other areas, let's move down. I go into contaminated land. It's telling me that this contaminated land and my design report is increasing. So the very act, I haven't laid a cable in the ground, I haven't sent a surveyor out, I have simply sketched a line, and I've got all this intelligence that's come together because what I'm doing is I'm using the location of the line, the intent of that line, its electrical connection, to ask questions of multiple digital twins, multiple data sets, multiple map layers. And it's given me contextual information that can help me make a better decision. But at the same time, I could be broadcasting my intent to the people who manage these different data sets, so they can tell me more about what needs to be done. Hopefully, I can make a better decision in this cable, one that delivers the electrical capacity where I need to go, but balances the needs of biodiversity and so on. The only thing I need to link different digital twins together is a knowledge of where they are and where I interact with them, and the list of questions I can ask of them. If I put a trench through this thing, what is the impact on the biodiversity? And I can answer sort of balanced questions in that way. Now that's one specific site, but if I go and turn on this other layer, so let's just put on this layer. Each of these decisions that we make has to be made in the context of the entire city. There's lots of things happening across the city. Now, the thing that unites them is they're in this city. They're happening in the place I'm interested in. I can look and make decisions about the impact of individual things, and I can look at that in aggregate and say, across this area, what decisions we made and what is the overall impact of them. And then I can bring some of that to bear on the first decisions we made. It's like, yes, that seems reasonable in the context of what you're doing, but in the context of the overall impact in Edinburgh, you simply cannot go through that SSSI. We need to minimize that sort of impact. Location is a very, very powerful tool. It tells us how things link together. It helps us understand the world better. It helps us develop understanding so we make better decisions. We need to be more cognizant of it, and we need to help a wider community understand how they can make use of it, because it is the simplest, cheapest way of linking the complex data sets that we need to link together to try and both mitigate, manage, and reduce the impact of climate change. So hopefully, I think I'm just about on time, Denise.
You are perfectly on time,
Thank you.
actually. All of these speakers so far get gold stars for keeping to time. We'll pick up questions. So if you have questions for Charles, please do add them to the chat, and we will pick them up in the panel session after our next speaker. So thank you very much, Charles. I really appreciate the presentation. So if I can ask our next speaker to put their camera on. So this is Liz Hughes. Now Liz joined Map Action in 2013 and has been leading the way. I'm just checking, have we lost? Oh no, Liz is there, that's right. You've moved on my screen. So she's been, she leads Map Action now and does some amazing work there, but did spend many years, as she says, on the other side of the map. Working for humanitarian organizations in East Europe, West Africa, Asia, the Middle East. I have great envy of the amazing places that you must have been, Liz, over the course of your career journey in all of this. So she's worked really very much in that development programs around disaster and conflict emergencies, which is, I think, sometimes for us living in the United Kingdom, not something we always see the high impact of. And I think that the work that Map Action does is really critical. And I think, what's amazing about this sort of response space too, is when you talk about climate change, that brings with it such a new level of challenge and natural disasters that need to be responded to now as well with what's happening in climate change. So with that, I will hand to Liz, and she can talk you through the work of Map Action and how it relates to this topic. So Liz, if we can get you to unmute, that would be.
Great. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, and we can hear you well.
Brilliant. Okay. You'll have to keep me to time too, because I can't actually see a watch. So I think just to set the scene on, thanks for the introduction, Denise, and just to set the scene on sort of emergencies, I just want to comment on 2 points that the Secretary General made at the COP opening to the leaders last week. The first of those was that 5 billion people suffered climate-related disasters in the past 10 years. And that's just over half the world's population. And what we know from the Code Red report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is that regardless of any action taken at the COP, the next 20 years are going to see a massive increase in emergencies in their intensity and their frequency around the world. Even if the right action is taken today and this week and last week at the COP and is sustained into the future, there's going to be a 20-year time span before the mitigations kick in. The second point that the Secretary General made that I thought was a really relevant one is that we need to do more to help the vulnerable. And that's really the work that Map Action focuses on. So the question then is, well, who are the vulnerable? If we know that 2/3 or more of the population are going to be living in urban settings in the next 10, 20, 30 years, then who are the people that we're most concerned about? And I think a factor in determining the outcome of a hazard event on people's lives and livelihoods is really their ability as individuals or as communities or as municipal authorities to absorb shocks, even if those shocks are getting worse. And the second element in vulnerability is how quickly urban growth has happened. And what we know is that where it happens in an unregulated, unplanned way, there is much more likelihood of a hazard event becoming a major emergency. But it's also relevant how people are perceived in that situation. I really want to stress the value of human geography in understanding the impact of emergencies on people's lives. Where people sit in the ecosystem is really key in terms of how an impact takes effect in people's lives. What we know is in areas of the world where modern day urban growth has been very fast, there are also places where there are high levels of climate-related emergencies, high levels of the movement of people, and some of the greatest unplanned peri-urban conurbations in the world. So obviously very, very vulnerable. I'm thinking of places like Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, of course. The extent we plan for and prepare for an emergency will reduce vulnerability. Many countries that have been living with emergencies for a long time, such as here, the Philippines, this is Manila, these are their plans that they have around the city. They've lived with emergencies, they know what it's like. An example I'd give you where there was a real poor planning, and surprisingly so, it's the Japanese earthquake in Fukushima in 2011. It was not the unexpected earthquake that caused the evacuation of 167,000 people. It was actually a failure to plan for a predicted tsunami that had already been modeled using the data. So Map Action has been working in these urban settings for over 10 years, but much of our work has been response orientated. And if I just take you through the response cycle, typically a disaster strikes, then you have a search and rescue phase, then you have response and relief, rehabilitation, reconstruction. Of course, it isn't that smooth, but what we have begun to realize is that actually we need to do much more work, as I'm saying, around the preparedness and the mitigation activity. So just to give you a couple of examples of what we've done using geospatial analysis. This is search and rescue in Nepal after the earthquake in 2015, but you could use it for all sorts of other hazards that occur. This is really helping the government to know whether they've got coverage in Nepal of all of the areas affected, and also making sure the teams know their areas of interest and the coordination is smooth. So actually very straightforward, really. It's also another example taken from Tacloban 2013, the storm that passed through the Philippines there, using geospatial analysis to look at the pre-landfall anticipated storm surge and then the actual landfall storm surge and the impact that occurred. And actually what this did was help the responding teams redirect their resources, because actually there were differences in the pre and the post pattern. So this is all sort of fairly straightforward, and it's not really rocket science. But I think what's important to understand when we think about urban emergencies around the world is that actually the data, and it's largely around the data, is not in place, and that does make quite a big difference. So typically what we would look for is the base data to build the background picture of what's needed. And even this data is often not in place, or it's inconsistent, unclear, poor quality. We then build on top of that. We look at what are the elements that will be the drivers of the emergency: the population distribution, health data, vulnerability, risk and hazard mapping. That's the baseline. And then we start to analyze that and look at what the real situation is likely to be. What's going to reduce that impact? What's going to make it worse? And we try and feed that through to those who are making decisions in the space of the emergency. As I've mentioned, increasingly, we're starting to realize that what we need to do is work more on the preparedness end of things, and what in the humanitarian world has been called anticipatory action. It's about early release of funds and resources, because that will help mitigate much better the impact of the emergency and ensure that people can recover more quickly. And that's very important in countries which are on track towards sustainable development goals and trying to evolve from situations of severe poverty. And what we're doing to try and do that is looking at 4 legs, and these legs really stand, whether that's a preparedness phase of the response or whether it's the emergency response. And it's obvious really to anyone who uses geospatial technologies, you need the data, you need the analysis of that data, and we're working with our data scientists to bring in much more forecasting of the impacts of potential hazards, visualizing it in ways that people can understand and access. Not everybody has the same competency and confidence to do that, and then working with others to learn and train together as we move forward. So just very briefly, a couple of examples of how we've used this. This is actually quite an old slide, but I think it's relevant because it's basically showing you one of the key things about urban populations is dealing with an emergency is you're dealing with density. And the density of people affected makes it very difficult to actually target the programs. Here is a map of sites that people moved into following a flood event in Burkina Faso. And the green spot points are the locations that people were living in. And that is actually being used to target the supports to people. But obviously the dynamics of the city matter. I think both Charles and Lizzie pointed to the complexity of systems. People live in systems, they don't live in isolation. And those are all affected when there's a major emergency in a city. And even parts of the city that wouldn't have been interrupted with their water supply or their food or whatever will be if they're dependent on a cash economy. So those systems are very important. And then thirdly, of course, the diversity of the city, the different population groups that are there and their access to support and resources. And that's the human geography bit that I really like to stress, because I think it's a bit that's sometimes overlooked. Obviously a very complex picture, but data and location are key in understanding all of that. And just to give you a last example, this is a model that we did with a partner of the Global Network of Civil Society for Disaster Reduction, which is a network of civil society organisations looking at displacement and where there were displaced camps and the impacts potentially on those camps of these hazards as they were located. And this is all part of a project that's called Making Displacement Safer. In many parts of the world that are prone to hazards, where there is high vulnerability, there is high displacement of people. And that brings all sorts of other pressures onto the city that geography can help solve, actually. What we're hoping to do into the future is make these civil society efforts more visible, because we think they are giving a granular picture of what's happening to people that are often very marginalised and very hidden. And that's something that we can do a lot more about. And we're working with organisations like the Centre for Humanitarian Data, their predictive analytics team, with our data scientists, working with Edinburgh University's Volcanic Hazard Modelling project, to try and use models and provide those at an earlier stage for people to be able to provide earlier responses and mitigations. So that's a bit of a whistle stop. I'll stop there. But if anybody is interested in working with us on any of this, we'd love to hear from you. Back to you, Denise.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liz. I'm always amazed at I guess the breadth of the work that Map Action does. So I cannot recommend highly enough to everybody that if you do want to get involved with them, it's well worth a chat with Liz. So that's the end of our first three speakers for today. So I would like to invite Liz and Charles and Lizzie back on camera and to unmute your mics. And to join them, I would like to introduce Rachel Higgins, who joins us from the Ordnance Survey. Rachel's a public policy and public affairs specialist with 16 years of experience in working and engaging at all levels of government. And by that, I mean all. Rachel has got a background in local government, as well as dealing with everything up international and international spaces as well. Rachel's also one of my fellow council members on the AGI too. So welcome, Rachel, and thanks for joining the panel. I'd also like to introduce Nigel Edmead. Nigel's the partner of learning at Place. If you haven't heard of Place yet, hopefully there'll be a blog link added to the chat here. Please do go have a look. I will declare this is one of the organisations for whom I'm on the advisory board for. But they're a data trust, and I think that actually they're a really interesting organisation that is trying to tackle some of these data sharing challenges that a lot of our speakers have talked about today. So well worth having a look at what they're doing there. I should say Nigel is also a geo-focused learning development specialist. So he spent a really long time in his career looking at, I guess, how you educate people about geospatial, but also how you use it to sort of help teach people and improve decision making as well. So Nigel, thank you so much for joining us today. So I think, you know, to me, that set of three presentations really highlighted, I guess, the diversity of both opportunity and challenge when it comes to our urban environments. I know from a geospatial perspective, if we look at the last 2 weeks, often we see a lot of pictures of satellite imagery, and we see a huge amount of sort of the contribution of Earth observations to this space, which is hugely important. But I think each one of you also illustrated that there's a lot of other geospatial data that's required to go in, particularly when you're looking at an urban space and people are tightly packed together. As you say, Liz, the human geography aspect is hugely important to look at, and often not easily done with an image. And I think, Charles, you just highlighted the fact that, you know, there's so many levels, whether you're underground, you're above ground, you're multi-story, etc. And for you, Lizzie, with the planning presentation, you know, these poor planners to some degree that are just trying to grasp and pull all this information and everything together. So to us, the panel, where I wanted to kind of start is to look at some of the, I guess, key areas of discussion that we've had in COP26 so far. And one of those big areas is energy, and looking at sort of energy as a topic. And I know obviously, Liz, in a disaster, something that's often not available very quickly when you're in a disaster situation. But I wanted to look to sort of ask the question about this, you know, in looking at the myriad of different ways we can improve the energy access or improve efficiencies and uses, etc. Where are sort of each of your organizations, or where are you seeing, I guess, the role where geospatial's playing a really important part in it already, but where do you think we're not quite getting it right? Where can we be better at sort of understanding and using this, our geospatial tools for the energy conversation? So does anyone want to kick us off with some thoughts on that one?
I'm very happy to, if I may.
No worries, go for it, Rachel.
Thank you. So as you might expect, as a national mapping service, and national operating company in the UK, we are starting to do much more in the energy space. You may have seen a few months ago, the UK government published an energy digitalisation strategy, and it's obviously a part of a larger suite of policy products that the government is putting out now, from net zero to the energy white paper. And obviously we've heard a lot about that at COP26, the massive changes that are happening across this section in generation and network and distribution. I think OS's contribution here is thinking about the creation of a national energy systems map. And we're working in collaboration. And I think that's the big thing that is really important. I think, Charles, you showed it in your demonstration too, you know, that the idea that if you're going to link data, which is obviously the most foundational thing you can do, to create an answer or identify a problem, you must be able to network it, and collaboration is the thing that will get there. And that's where OS is taking that, what I describe as a data broker role. So we're trying to bring in, collaborate with the Energy Networks Association and energy producers in the UK, and energy companies, to really provide a map which looks at those peaks and flows, that where are the capacity within the energy network, and also where obviously those cables, those pipes are in the UK, or at least in GB. And I think digital copies or digital twins are absolutely amazing in this space. And yes, there's a lot of innovation, but and it is incredible to watch it. But I think actually what we really need is the set of tools, and we're trying to contribute to that at OS to really help support the changes that are coming, and particularly the changes that are going to happen at a local decision level. And I know obviously this is a bit of a thing from me working at but so many of these things are going to be local heat networks or regional electricity networks. And I think that collaboration also within areas, or within local areas, within regional areas, is going to be absolutely key. So to give you an example of the National Energy Systems Map in action, what we have is a company that actually is a geovation company called NOCO, and they are using our map to really work with local areas to find areas, like you said, but where do you put a solar farm? Where do you put a wind farm? And you need to be able to know from the data that is available to you, if you can plug it in, can the network take it? Has it got the capacity? Has it got that? Will it have the capacity to take it day by day or by season across the year? Those things are absolutely fundamental. And of course, that data combining, we get into the meteorological data, and we get planning data, we have ownership data, who owns what, where and how. And it's about really connecting into that as a massive grid and network. And I think it's great that we've started thinking about the tools in that space, but obviously there's so much more to do, and collaboration. And as soon as you start layering it all in, like Charles has shown on a map, you can see how powerful it is as a decision-making tool.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rachel. It's good to hear the work that the organisation's doing. Anybody else like to share some aspects of the energy side of things?
If I can jump-
You go, Charles.
go ahead, Lizzie.
Charles and then Lizzie, if you like.
So it's an area we're really interested in, and there's quite a lot of work we're doing with the utilities and so on that we work with. So one of the major problems is modeling where you need energy, where energy might be supplied from, who it needs to be delivered to, but also the impact of the change that you might make. And there's a big issue in that traditionally the assets, which are where the cables or the pipes or everything else are stored in one system, and the operational view is stored in a different system. So the operational view being the thing that tells you how much load is on the network, or what the fluid pressure is in the water network or gas network. And it can be very hard to marry those two worlds together. So we're working with organizations to try and bring the two views together, because the operational network emerges from the assets that you have, so and where they are. If you do that, you can then start what geospatial is very powerful at, is doing what if I put a new cable here? What does it mean for the rest of my network? In order to do that, you need to be able to run a model against it. And what the sort of the holy grail for us is the ability to run hydraulic modeling, electrical modeling, gas pressure modeling in real time. As you saw that demo I did before, we technically can now run an electrical model in real time as we sketch in a new cable, and it can tell us, yes, you can put a cable there, but it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to sustain the load that the extra renewable energy is going to put onto it. Therefore, you will need to do this. And you can make those investment decisions and those complex decisions upfront before you've done anything. You've just drawn a line. That, for us, is where we need to get to. And also the linking together of the multiple utility networks, so we can have a balanced energy system, because there's no point one person increasing delivery of gas to a certain area when we're trying to do the opposite, and so on. So we have to link these things together and ask coherent questions of regions. In this region, what is happening? And a major part of it is that technical challenge of having data which is of high enough quality to sustain the questions that we ask of it, and the ability to run modeling in real time against it, so we can make more informed decisions. That's the area we're really focusing on.
Brilliant. Lizzie, did you want to go?
Yeah. The thing that was on my mind is more, I think you both touched on it, is it's the collaboration between what is traditionally a very kind of privately sector driven environment, where everyone is quite closed off. This is my data, I don't want to share. Data standards are not adhered to, data standards haven't existed. And there is definitely movement, and you both kind of talked about it as well, as to being more open, being more happy to share, being more collaborative in that. But there is still a big issue in terms of actually having data that you can put together. So one water organization may map it in a different way to others. Some have moved more on in the BIM space, some have moved on more into the spatial space. How do you bring that together? And there's still quite a lot of work to do in that space in order to actually get the benefits. The benefits, I think, are there, really easy to see, and what we can do with it, but we're not quite there with the data to underpin it yet. And I think that's a big area that we need to look at.
Excellent. Liz or Nigel, did you want to add anything to this one, or we can move to the next question?
I'm just going to say that, at Place, I mean, the premise of Place is to collect this primary data. We see ourselves as this public data infrastructure, focusing on urban centers. So particularly in Africa, looking at the issue of base data, I think Liz mentioned that, and recurring based data collection. And we're going to be collecting both drone and street imagery, so high resolution drone imagery, which is a sort of final mile, if you like, or the end point of the satellite imagery that we've been seeing from the other presentations, which has been fantastic. And we've all talked about it. You can't measure what you can't see, right? I think it's the idea that there has been a lack of this primary data available to government institutions in the private sector. And to Lizzie's point about not being collaborative, the Place is premised on this idea of a data trust with members who can access this data collectively and benefit people collectively. So it feeds these machine learning models that Charles has talked about, where are these utilities, what are the, where are the consumers and things like that. So we're very excited about being able to support and be the infrastructure behind a lot of these sort of goals and expectations at a COP.
Excellent. Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to switch gears on us with questions now and pick up something. Liz used one of my favorite terms, particularly from out of a Locust Charter perspective, and that's talking about the vulnerable people. And I think when we think about climate change, that level of vulnerability is actually increasing. There's populations which we never would have considered were vulnerable before this, that are now actually increasingly becoming so. we've seen some amazing things already. Charles, your demo was sensational. And I think that one of the great luxuries we have living in the UK is our access to the technology. What I'm interested to know is where do you think we need to get better, if you like, at perhaps identifying those vulnerable populations and those vulnerable places, sites, for example? Where's the real richness of opportunity for geospatial in helping to identify these groups and support them as the sort of climate change brings the changes that it's going to and the impacts upon them? So I think maybe, Liz, I might throw to you as a first one for this one, just because I know that was your term in your presentation. But I'd be really interested in your kind of perspective, I guess, on where we can all be doing this a bit better.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. And I guess I draw a distinction whether you're talking about how do we do better in the UK or how do we do better globally.
Globally would be what I would say.
The reason I draw that distinction is that we should have the resources in the UK to be able to understand that question. And certainly there are countries in the world that have a very, very strong handle on who is vulnerable in their population, regardless of what the risks are. And that really comes around more to a political will to look into this issue, I think, than it does anything else. But how geospatial helps with that is that you can get a sort of, you can get a sense of the space, of the distribution of the people that you're concerned about. And to give you one example, actually, in Israel, I know that they did some work as part of the Cities Initiative, and they were able to map out vulnerable members of their population in Tel Aviv who may be subject to the impacts of any sorts of explosions that they received from the Palestine and so on. And that situation is interesting because that's quite a dense area, it's a big population, but it was about being able to know where people were who would need assistance. I think actually many of us had experiences during COVID. I live in a village in Somerset. The village had taken charge of the geography and had worked out who to look after in those given situations. So I would say that actually that's all about political will, and then using maps and data to start to implement a decision, which is we're going to look after people who are vulnerable to this particular risk, whatever it is. So I think that's what I would say. And organizations like the Red Cross have big programs that go down to that level of detail that can really take care of people at the village level. Over to you.
Yeah. Anybody else like to tackle that one? Go for it, Charles.
So I actually got into GIS because of this sort of issue. I saw a road being planned in an area of North Wales that would have improved certain aspects of quality of life in terms of noise and so on. But because of the knowledge I had from working with the local authority there, I knew that that road was going to isolate an already deprived community, make it hard to get into and out of. And it really struck me that the person designing the road, they weren't a bad person. They were trying to do their job with the knowledge they had. What I would say is that usually there are people and communities who understand different aspects of a problem, who is vulnerable, what the impact of something upon them would be. There are people you can ask, but it's knowing who to ask and knowing what the impact will be is the problem. And I envisaged at that time, this is 30 years ago, I envisaged, wouldn't it be great if all the information was available to me and I can ask questions of it? Because there are people there who already know what the impact of that vulnerable population would be. And location is the way to do that. As Liz just said, I'm planning to do this thing in this place. Can you tell me what the impact is upon you and how do I mitigate it? And then you can make more balanced decisions. And almost the only way we can work out who's impacted and who do I need to speak to and what questions do I need to ask is by understanding the relative location of these things. That is our role as a GIS community in this. And the understanding of that needs to be better developed in the wider community because it is genuinely the cheapest, easiest way of bringing different sets of information together and identifying who to speak to. The knowledge and the care and the concern is out there. We just have to link it together.
I think that one I can't agree with you more, actually, Charles. That sort of need for local knowledge and that sort of and bringing that into that space. I guess in follow-up, actually, I'm curious to explore this one now because, I know we've got one person here that's worked in local government. I've certainly worked quite a bit with local governments and I find them to be phenomenally globally underfunded typically and underskilled with the capabilities that they do need for this. What could we be doing, I guess, as geospatial professionals and you know, perhaps the decision makers as well? What can we be doing more? I know, Nigel, perhaps you've probably got some comments to make on this, because I know premise really with Place is the policy is to use local organisations to do the data capture in the countries that you're working with. There's a lot of reasons behind that. So do you want to share a little bit about that sort of role of local?
Yeah, I mean, yes, the premise is that we work with partner and work with government to basically let them direct where this data collection is going to take place. It enables local businesses to actually take on the role and responsibility of collecting this information at a specification, you know, that is, you know, basically that our membership can consume. And as I said, it's basically the infrastructure against which other people would use that imagery to do things like the detection of these communities. I think just coming back to the identification of these sort of at-risk communities is an opportunity here, and we've seen in other countries where, you know, there's been a combination of mobile network data in conjunction with satellite imagery to do direct cash payments to the impoverished. There is, and Denise, you mentioned it, then we start moving into the ethics of geographic information, right? And obviously you mentioned the Locus Charter. I mean, one of the premises of the Place Trust is that the membership is driven by this idea of ethical use of data. So as a member of Place, you'd recognize and sign up to the Locus Charter. So really, it's like devolving a lot of this data collection back into the remit of these national mapping authorities in these countries to collect at their discretion where this data is picked up.
Brilliant. I am conscious of time here. There is a question. I'll pull this one up just because someone has actually popped this into the chat here, and it is tackling that sort of ethics and privacy. I'm going to throw this one out there because I think it actually goes to the heart of, again, something that Liz said with the sort of human geography aspect. I think one of the things that we're fantastic at with geospatial and the space world is that we love to talk about our tech. We love to talk about the capabilities of our software and so forth. And I think Liz is right in that we do forget the kind of human interoperability component somewhat here, and the sort of that human aspect. And actually it's those humans that, you know, what is it, 9 billion or so that we've got on the planet now, that are actually creating the data that we need in order to make a lot of these decisions. And so the question was really asking, I guess, you know, how do you embrace, and actually they say, how do you embrace, but I would say, how do you balance that need for privacy and that respect for privacy for all those individuals? But also, how do you build the trust with the citizens of the world so that they're willing to share the information that we need to make a lot of these geospatial and location intelligence decisions? You know, I think one of the things that certainly tracing apps showed last year was that there's actually a really increasing mistrust of big organizations and governments and so forth when it comes to the use of data. Thinking about your organizations and what you do, and I know a lot of you use individual information, you know, information gathered from citizens. What's your nugget of wisdom that you would share with, I guess, all organizations that they should be doing to help maintain that trust with the general population that we've got out there? And I'm going to ask for really quick kind of, you know, comments on this one because we're about to wrap up the panel in a sec. So who'd like to kick me off?
You'll have to choose.
I'd say
Okay, Nigel first then.
I mean, I think you know, the Locus Charter is a starting point, right? I mean, it provides a framework against which we have ethical, responsible use of geographical information. If parties sign up and recognize that, it's a start point, right? It doesn't say that it's going to stop misbehavior, but at least people recognize that they're adhering to these principles, right?
I appreciate the plug. Anybody else want to add to that one? Lizzie?
I was going to say it's transparency, but also making the benefit of that data being available back to the citizen so they can actually see the benefit of why their data is useful. Because you can be transparent, but if it goes off into a black hole and I've accepted it, I still don't see what I'm gaining from giving you my data. And that's a big thing to think about. How do you pay that back to the public? And whether it's thanks or just availability or whatever it is.
I like that one. I really like that one.
I think, sorry.
That's all right. If I go Rachel and then Charles.
Sorry, John. For me, there's 4 areas. I love the obviously the plug for the Locus Charter. It's an excellent thing and it needs to be used. I think from an OS perspective, our data is authoritative, it's foundational for the UK, and that is a really big benefit when it comes to building trust. So you can prove provenance, you can prove that these data has been collected with care, with an ethical perspective and collated and records are maintained and there's a point of redress. And I think there is no room for ambiguity when it comes to climate science, and making sure that there is that trusted foundational data in the mix is a great start. And second point is around skills. So I think making sure that we as data professionals, which are location data, geospatial, information specialists, data scientists, analytics, whatever it might be, we as a community to come together and think about our skills, what we need from an ethical perspective and the tools we're using, and we know how to use them correctly. I completely agree with Lizzie on the transparency front. It's making sure you tell people how you use the data that you've got. We don't necessarily collect personal information, but I can understand that as soon as you get down that value chain and you are collecting and connecting into other data, you begin to open up a lot of other questions. And for the last point, I think, yes, it is being clear about the barriers or the potential that for the purposes for which your data will be used. But I think there's also a role for emphasising the opportunity. And I think nowhere have we seen that best demonstrated than during the pandemic. And I think if we come together with public health information and preparedness across the world that I was hearing very strongly from Liz's presentation, I think we've got a great opportunity.
Yeah, thanks. Charles and Liz, you got the last final words on this one.
I think the fundamental thing is to have trust. You need to be trustworthy consistently. That's the fundamentals of it. We need to recognize that geographic information is particularly powerful when it comes to identifying individuals. Even if you're not storing names and addresses and things, you can find people very quickly and easily. There are techniques, statistical techniques for dealing with that. And there are codes of ethics around it. We have to ensure that we apply it and help other people who might not understand the extent to which geographic data can be used like that. We have to help them understand their responsibility around it as well.
I like it. Liz, did you have a final word for us?
And then I think that the final thing for me would be gather the data you can use, with all of those other caveats that my colleagues have said on the panel. Don't just gather the data for data's sake. And for our context, and it's about understanding the context you work in as well, although I recognise there are massive repercussions as well as you kind of get context on context on context. So it is one to constantly question ourselves really and think through what and how can this be used, and have we got this right, and keep reflecting on it and not making assumptions that we know. That's probably what I would say around that.
All comments and points that I couldn't agree with more. And thank you, obviously, everyone for the support. AGI is one of the signatory organisations to the Locus Charter, as is Ordnance Survey, Royal Geographical Society, and a number of others that are there. If you're interested in being part of that community, or you want to find out more, we will post the link in there so you can go and have a read, and obviously come and find one of us, the signatory organisations, and we'll be more than happy to talk about the reasons we're involved with the work that's happening there. And with that, I will bring the panel to a close because I'm conscious that I'm eating into time now for our second session of the day. But thank you all to our amazing panelists. I would have happily continued conversation with you all for quite a long period more. There were a lot of questions that came through that I would have liked to have tackled. But really appreciate your time and your presentations and your insights, and hope you enjoy the rest of the KTN last couple of days, I think, that we've got. So thank you very much, guys. And now I've got James Cutler up on stage with us. And James, I will just share our slides so that you've got your next group up. Oh, where are we? This one. So, James, over to you.
I'm not quite sure what slide you're showing there, or whether anybody can see me.
I can see you, and I think everybody else can see you. And the slide that I've got up at the moment is the one that just shows your 4 speakers.
Oh, right. Okay. So I'm not head to screen. Or maybe. Okay. Good morning. Thanks, Denise, and thank you all on the first part of our session there today. That was really great. I think sets a stall out very clearly on some of the policy issues as well. I'd just like to welcome anybody who's now joining us for the second part of AGI's session here. I like to say here at COP26. As Denise said, AGI is the UK's premier geospatial membership organisation. We're delighted to be part of this space and geospatial virtual pavilion during COP26. My name's James Cutler. I'm a lifelong geographer and I'm a director at AGI. In my day job, I'm responsible for commercial strategic accounts for the satellite applications Catapult, where our mission is to innovate for a better world empowered by space. I think that resonates immediately with the challenges being faced at COP26. So without further ado, following hot on the heels of that excellent session, I'm delighted to welcome an international roster for our second session, considering the art and the science of the possible, illustrating where GEO and EO play a vital role in practice, documenting and articulating the impacts of climate change in urban environments, and in enabling effective mitigation and adaptation to those impacts. This will be followed, and I'm conscious we've had our time eaten into, with a forward-looking panel considering the future role of GEO and EO data and tools, on which subject, of course, your questions are very welcome. So let's get down to business straight away. Our first speaker is Pascal Coulon from the IT and Business Consulting Services organisation CGI, where he drives the geospatial propositions of CGI's UK central government business unit. Over to you, Pascal.
Thanks very much, James. So indeed, good morning all. I am Pascal Coulon, Technical Director within CGI, and in my day-to-day role, I am driving our technical geospatial propositions for our central government client across the UK. And today, I'm very excited to actually demonstrate some of the work we've done with the Welsh Government around essentially the delivery of their active travel platform, really enabling them to drive a greener Wales. But just very briefly, who are we in CGI? So we are a global IT company, but we've got a very interesting delivery model. We've got the concept of metro delivery model. So we are very close to our clients, but we are supported with a very much global network of specialists across the IT industry, and more specifically in the geo industry. So we've got a workforce strong of about 600 geospatial professionals dotted across the UK, and further afield across the world. We are very much a technology agnostic delivery partner. We'll work equally well with open source Esri, MapInfo type product. And we are very much, again, a very keen industry contributor, whether indeed with the AGI in the UK, OSGeo, but indeed as a member of the OGC organization. So we're not just there to deliver solutions, but we encourage our members to contribute to the industry, whether open source or more proprietary solutions. So let's look into more details what happens in Wales and how they've really enabled, implemented a platform that really helped them to essentially set the roadmap for a greener Wales. So it's very much from years of policy where they've really engaged with a wider range of stakeholders across the government, the Welsh Government, but also across the whole of Wales. So we're looking to that path from policies to realization, and understand how ultimately the solutions they've implemented really help them to keep on reusing data to really provide a sustainable solutions that help them to get more return, but also ultimately make sure that whatever they deliver is sustainable from a business point of view, but also drive a greener Wales. So everything started and quite ahead of the other countries in the UK, actually. Wales established their Active Travel Act in 2013. So actually, what is active travel? So active travel is very much about promoting the ability to travel from A to B without, for sure, the need of a car, but actually also to reduce the use of public transport. It's all about even more sustainable means of transport. So cycling, walking, running, all those mechanisms. But to do that, the Welsh government quickly realized that they needed a central view on their data, a central mean to get all their stakeholders engaged. So what they've really put in place on the top of their open data platform, Data Map Wales, they've really looked at getting all their 22 local authorities coming together under a single platform, single solution, edit a single, view on the data, about making sure that the data is shared into a secured and efficient way. When I say secured, it's not just about authentications, authorization, can you access data? It's about making sure that the data you use is safe to be used in the context you want to use it. Is it at the right scale? Have I got the right level of update? And so on. So it's about providing really an integrated solutions, which in turn help the Welsh ministers to have a up-to-date, accurate view on active travel, and then in turn direct the right funding to the right local authority. And as you can see, it goes into a bit of a cycle where the more you get report on what you're doing, the more you can accurately invest on your funding and be more specific and then drive a greener environment. So who are the stakeholders? Yes, I've spoken about obviously the Welsh government and local authority, but there is some key actors in the delivery of that platform, and not just from the IT perspective, but from a policy perspective as well. It's Transport for Wales and Sustrans. So Sustrans, the charity who's helping to develop cycling across the UK, has been a key driver in that overall policy implementations by helping to map the various cycle path or footpath actually across Wales. So what have we done for them? It's very much a business solutions that help them to really reach a net zero. So it's about, as I said, making sure that from a local authority point of view, to start with, on the left side, can we have a secured mean to access the data, secured mean to view from a single locations all my active travel network, and actually all the associated constraints. I want to make sure that whatever new cycle path, new footpath I want to implement is not going to start damaging further the environment. Are we creating the right balance between the demand and the impact on the environment? So by having this single view on the active travel network and an up-to-date view, that's very much a key starting point. It's about being able to edit live and real time all the data, their active travel network. So as soon as the data is updated, as soon as it's been QA'd, it can be pushed directly, which means that you have a quicker turnaround to drive further the policy. But ultimately, it's not just about local authority managing and reporting to the Welsh Government. It's also engaging with members of the public. Because the more you engage with them with a simple view, the more you develop the use of those facilities you've put in place via that policy. So again, the single solutions was having a dual, well, he's having a dual purpose really, a back office solutions for the local authority and the Welsh Government, but also a simpler view for the member of the public who can understand what sort of access to active travel sort of facilities they've got in their surrounding, to go shopping, to go to work, to go practice leisure, but also it's actually helping members of the public who are there using on a daily basis those networks to report feedback. So all of this really, when you combine the feedback from the public, the real-time editing of the data from the local authority, we are then, as I mentioned, around the cycle driven by the policy, we're able to really put in place, enable the Welsh Government with a very simple solutions that help them to accurately focus their investments, the fundings for active travel, much more accurate than it's ever been done since 2013. So very quickly, it's just a bit of an idea how it all works, but you know, we're obviously looking at geospatial solutions. It's making sure that, as I said, it's a single locations for editing, not only just the geography, the network, but it's also about editing all the underlying data. But importantly as well, and that's where with modern technology, we can bring much more value from the data and make sure that this data can be reused, not only for active travel, but across different purposes within the authority, is making sure your data is accurate. It's the precision on the data is there. So making sure that you've got the right level of topology, the right level of network connection, so that actually in turn we can push this valuable asset to be used way beyond the remit of what it's been developed for in the first instance. So in conclusions, what the Welsh Government has really been able to do is they've developed a single central open data portal, Data Map Wales, which actually you can all go and visit by a quick search on the internet. You'll quickly find the data portal. You'll be able to quickly see how you can access, obviously, the active travel data set, but by having these central locations for sharing data, sharing open services, they've been able to create rapidly, in a matter of days, business applications that in return meant that they could be far more proactive in developing services to develop a greener Wales. So thank you very much for your time. I'll be happy to take any questions offline. And yeah, looking forward to the next session. Thanks, James. Over to you.
Thank you, Pascal, so much for those insights on what is needed to enable better informed travel, on better informed travel decisions. It's smarter for people, smarter for the planet. And I think it's really important and useful that you showcase really how what is ultimately a simple thing to the end user harnesses an incredible amount of complexity behind the scenes. So thank you for that. And while we're talking about smarter for the planet, so to our second speaker, Miranda Sharp, whose mission at Metis Digital is to connect data people and their data assets with opportunities to create value and impact. Miranda is also closely associated with the Centre for Digital Built Britain, Digital Twins, and Smart Cities. Miranda, over to you.
Thank you very much, James, and what an honour it is to talk to this august audience today. I'm busking as I try and get myself into full screen. Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of geospatial data, but also the challenges of securing a route to value. So as James said, I worked for a bit at the Centre for Digital Built Britain, where we were trying to collate the National Digital Twin. And this was trying to provide the guts and the infrastructure which supported connecting people's digital twins, because people are already creating digital twins of their assets. They're doing it for very good reasons. They're doing it for things like better asset management. They're doing it for assurance when a number of different people are working on the same asset over a very different life cycle. And they're also doing it so that they can foster greater collaboration along the supply chain. So we saw it as our mission in the National Digital Twin to provide the infrastructure and the maths behind the guts which connected it. Now, I have to start with what do we say a digital twin is. So when we talk about a digital twin there, we were talking about the two-way link between the physical asset and the digital representation thereof. And that enabled you to take a monitoring and evaluation view of the physical asset so that you could process that data in the virtual world and then plan interventions in the physical world. And that enabled you to make those sort of non-binary decisions that need a sort of an intelligent view of data. So shall I run this train in the most economical way, so that makes me the most money, or shall I run this way in the way that does least damage to the planet? And what is the difference? If I ask those two questions and I get two answers, what do I need to do differently? And why is that different? And so that's sort of the idea behind it. And it continues to be an excellent project. And as you can imagine, once you started talking about the digital twin of the train carriage, in this instance, it's not very long before you then start talking about the need for a digital twin of the signalling system and the track, and then actually the whole transport system, and you work up to the whole built environment. And so, you know, that's the challenge there. And that enables you, as I said, to tackle those non-binary problems, but also look at risk in a very joined up way. Now, I imagine that some of this audience will have seen this slide before. This is a community in Yorkshire, and you've blue dots for businesses, blue dots for houses, red dots for businesses. And you can see that this community is reliant on that road, and it's not unusual, therefore, for a number of services to be concentrated on that road. Now, that particular road is also a bridge. It was a bridge in Tadcaster, and in the flood event of 2017, that bridge was swept away. And that bridge, that not only bifurcated the community, but it also had a significant impact on power and communication services, both at a local and significantly a national level. But because we had only managed the risk of that asset as a transport network link, and not because of the interdependent systems on which that bridge served, we fell foul of not understanding what was going on. So everybody knew that their pipe was on the bridge. Nobody knew that everybody's pipe was on the bridge. And only when we bring together data like this can we take a view of risk in a sensible way that enables us to make the best decisions. And so that was the thinking behind this National Infrastructure Commission report, Data for the Public Good, which said that if we share data in a sensible, open way, then we would have reduced impact on the environment, amongst other great outcomes that could be assured. So, you know, I know I'm speaking to the converted when I say what we need to do here is share data and bring it all together. But of course, we're on the shifting sands now. There's more technology, there's lots of dynamic data, not just static data. It's coming at us from all sources. And one of the things that we did with my lovely colleague Simon, who we'll see in a minute, is that, you know, the temptation for geospatial people is just to put more stuff on the map. And that's what we did in Manchester here. We put all this data together and had in effect a completely unupdatable map, because the answer to everything is not just more data. Now, I'm particularly fond of this tweet thread from Gavin Freegard, the mellifluous Gavin Freegard, who characterises the Bond film Spectre as the story of a failure of an arm's length public body which believed the answer was just more data. In that, many of you will remember it, Max Denby tries to collate data from all over the world so that he can create the mother of all spy agencies. And what he failed to do was take into account the input of subject matter experts who really understood the data and would help him understand the nuances of it. And he failed to take into account, I'm sure he was no signatory of the Locus Charter, that not everybody will have such benign intent as the people who started it. In fact, he wasn't one of them. And if you haven't taken care of your ethics and built upon the trust, as Charles said, if you are not trustworthy, you're going to come to a sticky end, which, as all Bond villains do, he did. So, in this when there's lots more data around, and we can see the endless and boundless opportunity that it offers. Only collect the data that you're going to use, and don't think the answer is more, because what we always need when we're thinking about data is thinking about how we're going to create value of it. Now, I'm not talking about the precious gold bars at all. There are many ways to create value from data, and a safer and resilient planet would be one of them. But so it's not just about that. And I welcome the maturing discussions we're having about realizing data from value. So we're seeing less of this sort of my precious behavior, it's my data and only I can have it. We are seeing a maturing of the use of the ODI's open data spectrum. It's not I would argue that this is only one spectrum, the ODI spectrum, and only one axis, the ODI spectrum of how we can look at data. And open versus closed is one axis, but not them all. The more recent report from Arup, which is in the top right-hand corner, looks at the methods for securing value from data, which can be explored, and which might actually take us on the route of a more sustainable data supply, because purely publishing data and forgetting about it, calling it open, may not be the most economically efficient way to get value from data. It's only, we argue this as part of the National Digital Twin programme, by finding sustainable ways to support the funding of foundational data and the data infrastructure, will we all get the most value out of it. That I think is my closing point. That's really, and I've got all my links here if anybody wants any of those links to get to any of those fantastic and interesting reports. I look forward to the chat afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for that, and those insights into the complexity of data systems and of the data value chain itself, which I think I might summarise at some risk of starting a conversation as those need to be as sustainable as the planet itself, if we're going to get true value. So, to our final speaker, and on serving the planet, Dr. Ibrahima Cissé joins us down the line, not from Senegal where he's based, but from Lusaka in Zambia. Previously of Greenpeace, Ibrahima is now West Africa lead at Humanitarian OpenStreetMap. And on that short intro, I'll hand over to you, Ibrahima.
Thank you, James, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm really pleased and happy to participate to this panel and following all this interesting contribution. I'm really happy to bring ours. So, yes, I'm Ibrahima Cissé and working for OpenStreetMap, for Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, and as the director for West and Northern Africa region. I will start to share my screen. Just one moment. It's okay, you have it?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Yeah, how in what we are addressing climate change, and how we are addressing climate change using mapping and using data and working a lot with communities. And here, just before starting, to say that we are an international organization that is dedicated to humanitarian action and community development through open mapping. We have disaster response, we work for sustainable development, and we use technology for that. The disaster response is very important because our team are really working to prevent and also to participate when there are disasters, to collect the data, to make the map, to collect the information that are needed when there is a disaster or when there is climate impact or some consequences of climate change happening in around the world. So our team are there, they support, they take the information, and this information are needed to take the good decision, particularly for government, NGOs, and institutions that are working to support community. Sustainable development, why? Because we think that this issue of climate change need to be handled by the community and need to take into account the sustainability. So what we do, our action, our daily action need to be sustainable, need to take into account the community. That's why we work a lot with community, and we think that in our philosophy that the open data, the free software are important, because when data are made by people, for people, people are able to update the data, they are able to change it when the situation change, and they are able also to, they are aware of the situation. And when it's about climate change, so they can be prepared, they are more resilient because they understand, because they have participated to collecting this data. And it's the humanitarian, and I have heard so this aspect of ethic, of orientation for the use of this information for community. But when the community are in the heart of our action, it's much more easier. And to tackle the climate change is not only organization or people that are aware of the issue that are taking action, but also most of people that are impacted and they know about the issue and they take action. And it's where we hope that we can have more impact, and this issue that we are facing can be tackled with more efficiency. We are working toward a world where we think that everyone must count. So we need to count everyone, because we need to avoid leaving people aside. The map data should be accessible to use decision, because before acting in certain region, because there's some issue, having the data, having this information would be really useful to know where we need to act exactly. That's safe to improve lives, because we have the case of different part of the region where having data really help different organizations to see where we need to act with more efficiency, what are really the critical point that needs our action, and that impact more to the rest, because we understand that we cannot be everywhere, but we can really identify the critical point, the critical part where we need to work and where we need really to engage and to contribute to do the map. We are working in a lot of countries around the world. It's over than 163 countries. We are working a lot with volunteers also, more than 300,000 volunteers around the world. And we are mapping a lot, buildings, cities. For example, if we take the recent event in Mozambique that is really impacted by climate change with the flood, we have worked with our OSM communities, because we have also OSM communities around the world, and they have worked within a project called Mapeando Mi Barrio, meaning that they are mapping the city, the area, and by doing that, they identify how they can prevent the flood, what are the measures they should take, and it's really the ownership of the tools, by the communities. So because they understand, they know how to use it, they understand it, and they use it for their own benefit. And this is really something that is really crucial and really important. And we have also the example of wildfire in Bolivia, where we have we help to save biodiversity and a unique ecosystem, which in fact to contribute to mitigate the climate change. Because all this unfortunate disaster that we observe, most of them are consequences of climate change. But how we anticipate, how we can prevent, how we can make the community more resilient, but being more resilient, understanding the issue behind all this disaster, all this event coming, they are more aware and they understand better how their daily action contribute to mitigate, how they can contribute to less pollution, how they can contribute to preserve the biodiversity that is really contributing to mitigate this impact of the climate change. And we have set different hubs in different regions, in Asia Pacific, in Eastern and Southern Africa, where I'm right now working with the team, and we are trying to see how we can map for humanitarian purpose, how to support communities with the issue that they identified, not being identified at the global level, but really seeing the area like environment, sanitation, water and sanitation, seeing the area of public health, etc. So there's different area. We have 11 impact area, how the community can identify themselves, what are their top priority, what are the issues they are facing, and how the mapping is a solution, how the mapping can be a solution to better understand the situation and take the good decision when it becomes to act, and prevent also the disaster or the situation that can. We have also Western Northern Africa just starting, Latin America, Caribbean hub also will come soon. And we are engaging, trying to engage also with local, with communities, but also with partners, government and NGOs also. That's why I think this panel is a big opportunity for all of us, maybe to combine our effort, because it's really a big opportunity to see all this knowledge that can be shared and owned by the majority of people that maybe don't get this chance to know how to use map, how to collect data, how to prevent all this. And also we are distributing, we promote funding, we promote the grants allowing young youth in general to create, to map, to start using the data for the issue they find relevant in their region. And lastly, I say that I think that as humanity, we must understand that there's no issue. There's not a part of humanity that can be saved in the expense of the large majority. It's a bit mistake when the decision makers understand or think that without doing an effort, there's a part of the world that can be saved and another part that is impact. No, we have a common destiny, and we really think that it's more wisdom, more solidarity, more empathy, or maybe more Ubuntu spirit. Just we need to combine all our effort and to partner with community, with government, NGOs, volunteers, networks, and volunteer network to ensure that the map data are available and they are used, and that the local people can lead the local problem. So the problem that exists locally are not identified in other place and decide in other place what are the priority, but by the local people themselves, their local problem, they identify what matters to them, and we can get them the right people to the right place at the right time. So we think that there are the challenge that we are facing, and yeah, we continue hoping and thinking that we'll be able to tackle this if we really work together and yeah, share our experience and are willing to save this planet. Thank you a lot. Back to you, James. Merci.
Ibrahima, thank you so much for reminding us of two things there, of the challenges and impacts that climate change represents are a real and present danger, not just to millions of people directly, but actually to everyone on the planet today. And your plea, secondly, for more accessible and better data and for the skills to make impactful decisions as much at community level, if I'm understanding you correctly, as at government level, to enable that greater resilience at grassroots, as well as policies and funding to mitigate and adapt to both those immediate and emerging threats, is a really well made one, and something I'm sure that as we set up our panel now for some questions, that Simon Navin, who's joining us, will want to reflect on and look forward from as well. Simon is the Geospatial Services Function Head at Jacobs for UK EMEA. Jacobs, the multidisciplinary engineering company. And Simon is properly grounded in the world of surveying and innovation, including from his time with Miranda Ordnance Survey. So Simon, welcome. It's an absolute pleasure. And I think, have we got, Natasha, we got everybody up on the panel now? I can't see from where I am. I'll have to assume so. Right, so we're just fielding some questions. Marvelous. I think we've got the panel visible to everybody. I'm just fielding some questions, but in the meantime, I'll take facilitator's prerogative, if I may, and reflect on what we've heard this morning and this afternoon, building on how geospatial really seems and underpins the drive for a sustainable planet. I'd like to ask the panel, and forgive me, I can't remember who says this in which film, and I'm sure one of you will tell me. As someone once said, this time it's personal. That is to the geo and EO communities. We've had all this data, all of it, so much of it with geospatial attributes to it. We've had Landsat for nearly 50 years. We've got tools in our pocket. We've got modeling systems, predictive analytics. As practitioners, though, we haven't been terribly good at getting this capability across to all the right audiences. But as William Priest from the previous Geospatial Direct Commission head said 18 or so 2 years ago, we're now living suddenly, or apparently suddenly, in this geospatial moment. And I'd like to ask the panel, starting with you, Simon, what is it that has changed, has brought this community more central, and what can we do to ensure that we keep our voice?
Yeah, thanks, James, and thanks for inviting me on today. So I think so much has changed in terms of that global understanding of the value of location and geospatial data, because in the last 10, 20 years, however long we've been using the internet, 20 years, people have become generally more location savvy in the way that they go about their daily business. And this isn't just people in the geospatial profession. There's an expectation and a demand that most things that people engage with in the digital world now comes with a location component to it. So actually there's a greater demand for location information, location analysis, in all the things that we do. And that's great for us as a profession. But actually, as data increases, as demand increases, what we need to do is ensure that the tools and the infrastructure that we have to carry out the analysis and the simulations and the predictions and things that we've been hearing about in the sessions today and at this session and the previous session are available to professionals, but also available to citizens to be able to do some of the work that they need to do and find out some things that they want to do about how we bring data sets together. There needs to be a bit more of a democratization, I think, of geospatial. It's been very much in the ownership of the professional. But if we're going to tackle things like the climate emergency, undoubtedly the most pressing global issue of our time, then I think we need to make sure that information is available to people so they can make some of those choices themselves and carry out some of that work themselves. One of the big things that I see changing is the infrastructure and the access to data that we need to be able to carry out some of these increasingly complex bits of analysis. We know that we've had to move from desktop GIS to server-based GIS to cloud-based GIS to be able to do analysis. But what's the next phase? I'm currently trying to get my head around things like ArcGIS on Kubernetes and delivering things through microservices and using things like containerized software delivery, because there is going to be a real unpredictable demand for how we do some of this crunching of the data. So I do actually think that although data is increasing, we need to ensure that actually we're developing the systems that support the amount of data that's increasing as it's being made increasingly more accessible.
That you picked up a few words there, so I'm particularly interesting, and I'm going to pass on to Ibrahima for some other comments, because democratization seemed to be at the root of your plea, Ibrahima.
Yes, yes. I think that the democratization of this knowledge is the challenge that we have now. Because if we imagine that how 5 billion of people around the world have access or knowledge of this opportunity of this technology and how to use it, it will be great. It means that each one, for each action that each individual is doing, this person can decide and understand that his action is contributing to destroy or to reinforce the environment. You know, this is the challenge that we have. That's why we think that open data, free software is really something really important. But of course, we understand that behind there's ethical question, and there's question of using this data and giving trust to people. But it's the beginning of new approach, like the same thing when that with internet or with new how things are evolving. But I think we can get there if we continue to all work to make people being in the center of our decision and not deciding for people, but allowing them to take their decision for their own benefit or their own problem. And this is really the challenge that we have. And sometimes I used to say, thinking about the consequence of the issue is not the solution. It's better to think about the cause of the issue. You know, the disaster, the climate change, what's happening are the consequence of a system that we have built and is not more working. And we need to change this system. It's what, yeah, thank you.
And it's great to see so much passion. And often we talk about the 5 billion who have that access. We forget at our peril the vulnerable 4 billion who don't have that access. And I think, Pascal, you probably have a comment there where you were talking about delivering simple capability to everyone, whereas the systems behind it are very complex. You've got any sort of thoughts about how we ensure that we keep that voice into the future?
Absolutely. So I think here we've got twofold to consider. It's great to have such a huge quantity of data when you think that I think 90% of the data we've got has been produced in the last year or something like that. It's phenomenal. So I think we now need to really engage with everybody to make sure that they challenge and have a critic eye on the data they use. Am I safe to use the data I'm seeing on this map? Is it used in the right context? I mean, we've seen a lot of examples over the last 20 months where a lot of information was fed back to us, and we felt like, oh, am I seeing the right, information there? Is it up to date? So that's the first fold, making sure that, we've got a good understanding of the data. The second fold, I think we have a very good, especially in the UK education system. We are obviously engaging from a young age with all our youngsters, helping them to how to use computers. But I think reading maps is not anymore just on paper. It's reading maps, digitally. And it's making sure that, again, they have the right skills to engage with all those new tools. And again, we are very good at teaching them how to be critic, to understand what's the meaning of truth. That is telling them, what you're seeing on the map there, is that the real truth? Are we using it correctly? So I think, it's not about developing simple system. It's all the work upstream to make sure that downstream, when you deliver something that looks really trivial to use, well, are we using it the correct way?
I think, thank you, Pascal. That's a really interesting challenge as well, isn't it? To us as educators, both upstream and downstream to the next generation. Because the skills gap that's so often talked about isn't just about the ability to use the tools, but to understand what goes into them, what's coming out of them. I think that's and what questions to ask, and that comes to Nigel's earlier comment about, and Charles's earlier comment about trust and trustworthiness, and ethics, and who's contributing and who is preparing the algorithms that go into producing those outcomes. It's been said many times, but how to lie with maps is something that we need to keep at the front of our heads, just to be the intelligent customer. Miranda, on being the intelligent customer and providing simple, trustworthy truths at the end of the value chain. What are your thoughts as to where and how we sustain our credibility and trustworthiness to the important communities, stakeholders?
So I think it's a really exciting time. I think, well, I don't know if I just live in this bubble, but I hope that what the pandemic has shown us is that we need to be careful with data, and so we have a bunch more. I believe that we have a bunch more more sophisticated data consumers out there. Just look at the way the Google mobility data was hoovered up, the way John Burns-Murdoch work in the FT is the most downloaded bits of the thing that they've ever had, and because the data has been so malleable. The COVID data has been so malleable and so mobile that people are much more. I hope that they're much more savvy. That you can the answer can be what you like. Here's my data. So what I hope that will translate towards is people stopping emailing their contradictory spreadsheets to each other, and instead working on a common data source and saying, well, if you apply my constraints and my views and my beliefs, this is the answer I get. Why is your answer different? So I think we have that opportunity. I think the challenge for geospatial in particular is that it's not as easy as a spreadsheet. And so the risk is that because geospatial data is relatively hard to work with, it misses out on the moment, the moment du jour, when the moment du jour is so very powerful.
That's great. Thank you, Miranda. And
James, James, can I come in there?
Of course, okay. Of course.
I think it's a great point there, Miranda, about the spreadsheet example. And I thought Charles, in his demonstration earlier, made a really good fist of showing that actually simplified data in the background is actually quite complex to deal with in the foreground. So his demonstration was really good about showing how to link data together, and we know that that's one of the challenges that we face is all of this data. If it's not linked, if it's not shared, if it's not available and accessible in various ways, then the challenge is tenfold. But it's still hard. It's still hard, to have the infrastructure behind the scenes to do that at a project level, let alone at a regional level or a global level. Which is why we, back to my earlier point about enterprise and about how we have to make sure we have the infrastructure to support it. Simplifying data is good, but sometimes we can't do that. So therefore, we have to find other ways to make sure that we can crunch and manage the data in ways that we can get some of those simpler messages across.
I'd like to add an extra point, actually, if I may. So we're all about sharing data and making sure we've got the right infrastructure. And I think most of us here on the panel have probably been using at some point the so-called OGC services. And I think we need to not be complacent. Those services, this technology is starting to age. And I think we need to embrace, it's easy for me to say that because we're part of it, but we need to embrace what the OGC is doing. They're really starting to look at the landscape, the technology landscape, and kind of, right, where are we moving with this huge amount of data? Are those services the right answer these days? So I think we need to keep an eye on what's going on there and really react. As you said, Simon, you're looking at Kubernetes. Obviously, you need to be able to scale, to adapt to the demand, but we also need to look at how we serve this data so that it's done the most efficient way.
Thank you very much for that interruption, Pascal, because it feeds straight into my next into the next question, which is what's coming over the horizon that will strengthen our ability to engage and inform and be better able to measure, monitor, and ultimately hold to account and support, hold to account policymakers and stakeholders, senior stakeholders, and ultimately support innovation, whether for resilience or for adaptation. You know, what is there to excite us, and what is there that perhaps is a threat?
I might jump in a bit. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to what's coming up in the horizon. There's two things that really excite me. I'm usually bored with what's going on the internet, and suddenly I see a few things popping up. So virtual reality. I'm not going to name that big company who changed its logo recently, but what they're starting to put up on the horizons there, it's really exciting because we're going to start looking at location services in the virtual world, and that is seriously exciting.
Yeah, the whole extended reality thing, I think, is really going to keep young people engaged. I'm very conscious I've probably only got collectively about 90 seconds. So Ibrahima, what do you see coming over the horizon?
I think that what is the future, if we just think about how we're going all to move, I think there's a need to put the rules and for this all this information technology, you know, there's a lot of things that will come and will continue coming. So how are we going to manage all this, and how are we going to put humanity in the center? This is the big question I think that we need to respond, that really can help us then to start putting the rule, because this will have different organization, corporates, you know, popping up, coming with new solution, bringing great ideas to push. But at the end of the day is how this contribute to make our fulfillment as human. And I think
that's a really good challenge to nearly end on. I'm just going to, Miranda, conscious you haven't had an input on this, building on Ibrahima's point, is there anything you'd like to add about what's exciting for the future?
I think Meta's move towards interoperability and ultimate interoperability is very exciting and very scary. I believe, I want to believe that their drive for interoperability will allow them to overcome shareholder interest and we'll get genuine openness and adversarial interoperability where previously we've had silos. So, you know, my Netflix and my Facebook and my Apple don't talk to each other, and I live with that friction in my life. So I believe that's really exciting. I think it opens up a whole can of threats that none of us have seen yet.
Thank you very much for that. I'm about to hand back to Denise, but I just first of all like to thank all of our panelists for their passionate and illuminating perspectives on where the ever-expanding art and science of the EO and GEO is taking us and helping contribute to saving us from ourselves. Enjoy what's left of the afternoon and COP26, and let's keep our fingers crossed for some good for the planet and good for the 5 billion and good for the 9 billion outcomes and actions. We've been AGI at COP26. Good afternoon.
Brilliant, and thanks, James. I will just put up, this is the last slide from us. Just to echo James's thanks, everybody that's contributed as a panelist or a speaker, and to all the participants that have been online today. Hopefully, if you've been interested at all in what AGI does, there was a link posted in the chat if you'd like to learn more about the membership and the organisation. Please do get out. There's still a couple more sessions on this afternoon, things that you can look at. I know there's recordings that you can view as well. So please do have a look around as well at the exhibitors area on the KTN network as well. And the recordings, of course, will also be available too. And so with that, The last thing I will mention is the slide that's on the screen, which relates to GeoCom. So if your interest has been piqued out of the conversation we've had today on climate and the urban environment, and you're keen to learn more, the annual conference for the AGI this year is looking at responsible, resilient recovery. So very much kind of, I guess, recovery from climate change, but also recovery from the pandemic that we've been through as well. So we'd love for you to come and join us later on in November and December as part of that as well. And with that, I will say, wish you a wonderful afternoon and thank you for joining us today. Over to Natasha at KTN.